Hello, Zachary. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Sorry, it just kind of like went really totally quiet.
Yes. I suspected that that's the reason. So yeah, I think we're all just on standby for now. They're trying to figure out the video. We should be sorted soon. Thank
Okay.
you.
Sure.
Mona, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, Susan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you clearly. But I think you will have to enable the video and screen sharing at your end. There are those icons at the very top.
It says you can't start your video because the host has stopped it. It's not me.
Okay, but Mona, what about you?
I can't start video either. It says the
Okay.
host has stopped it.
Okay. So I just check on that. Really apologize for this. Sorry about this.
Was denn? Was denn, mein Schatz? Okay, can you see me?
Not yet.
I think it's working.
I can't see you for some reason.
Now, I can see myself now, so my video is on. Mona, you can be seen as well.
Excellent. Yeah.
Zach,
But
would
I
you like to
can't-
try opening your video, Zach?
Let's see. Oh, there it goes.
There you go. Yes.
Great, and it's Pfizer.
Depending on which part of the world you're dialing in from, I would like to welcome you all for this exciting session on how do we manage knowledge for resilient infrastructure, and more importantly, not just manage knowledge, but also apply it for action, for really making resilient infrastructure happen. So today we have a very interesting panel of, from different parts of the world. We have Dr. Susan Roth. She is anchoring the knowledge management functions at the Asian Development Bank. She is Chief of Knowledge Advisory Services Center at the ADB. We'll also be joined by Mr. Louis Downing. He is the CEO of Global Infrastructure Basel Foundation, based in Basel, Switzerland. We have Dr. Zachary Bakwe. He's Strategy and Learning Advisor, Learning Team Lead at the Office of Policy and Analysis at the US government's Agency for International Development, and particularly the Bureau for Resilience in Food. We also have from the CDRI Secretariat, the Director of Research and Knowledge Management, Dr. Mona Anand. So we have an exciting lineup. I am Kamal Kishore. I'm a member of the National Disaster Management Authority of India. I'm the India co-chair of the Executive Committee of the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. Today we have a topic which is, at a meta level. We are not sharing specific practices in disaster resilient infrastructure, but looking at how do we manage knowledge, how do we curate knowledge, how do we apply it for the specific aim of making our infrastructure systems resilient to disaster and climate risks. And in doing that, over the last 20 years, I have myself confronted some challenges. The first challenge is that, whenever we want to set up a global or regional or national knowledge network, there is a lot of enthusiasm among the participants of the network to be part of the network. But it is very difficult to enthuse people to actually work in the name of network, work for the global public good in terms of curation of knowledge, as opposed to working on behalf of their institutions. So how do we bring about that spirit of creating global good in terms of knowledge? I think that's a standing challenge. The second is that, we invest a lot in knowledge management, but how do we actually measure its impact? How do we measure the results that you gain from it? When you do a straightforward, limited focus training program for a set of professionals, you can say that this is a training. As a result of this, these were the skills upgradation that happened. And as a result of these skills upgradation, these are the changes in the real world. How do you do that for knowledge? I think that is a very, very difficult challenge. The third is, how do you resource knowledge management activities in a sustainable fashion? There are examples from different sectors that have had knowledge management tradition for over 100 years that we can draw inspiration from. But how do we do that in the modern systems of disaster risk management? These days, whenever we design projects, it is almost mandatory to have a knowledge management component, and a certain proportion of your budget is allocated for knowledge management. Is it enough? How much is enough and how much is too much? And we all talk about mainstreaming knowledge management. We want to say that everybody should be a knowledge manager. Everyone working on anything should be drawing upon the global, regional, national knowledge management systems, as well as contributing to it. How do you measure that contribution? I think these are some of the challenges. To address this, we have a very eminent panel today with decades of experience in this area. While we kick off the discussion with our first speaker, I would like to highlight that in parallel, in the chat box for the audience to sort of hear multiple perspectives, we are posting 2 questions to hear the audience perspective on these issues as well. The first one is, what are some of the challenges you face in accessing knowledge on disaster resilient infrastructure? What are your preferred sources for information on disaster resilient infrastructure? It'll be good to see what comes out in the chat boxes, and later in the discussion, I would like to circle back to what we see in the chat boxes and bring that to the discussion here. But for now, It's my pleasure to invite Dr. Susan Roth to talk about her experience from the ADB perspective. ADB, as a learning organization, is now implementing the ISO standard 30401 for knowledge management systems. So we are making progress towards systematizing knowledge management systems and setting standards. It will be good to hear from her as to what has been ADB's knowledge management journey over the decades and what does the future look like. Over to you, Dr. Susan Roth.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. And it's a great honor to kind of set the scene on what knowledge management really is and how ADB is embracing knowledge management now as a strategic asset. I had to start my video first before I'm sharing my slides. So let me go quickly through them, and please interrupt me anytime if you have questions. You want to make this as interactive as possible. So again, I'm not speaking specifically about resilient knowledge management, resilient infrastructure, but about principles of knowledge management in general. So for the audience, for all of you who are not familiar with the ADB, we are a partner of the coalition, but just to, for those outside the region, we are the regional development bank in Asia. We have 68 member countries. Our portfolio, current active portfolio, is around $160 billion across the region, mainly in infrastructure. So we do play a significant role in providing solutions for resilient infrastructure. So I would like to share with you 6 learnings from our journey in knowledge management. So the first lesson learned is, and I think this is very relevant also for the coalition, is to define common grounds. And I think Mr. Kamal has already referred to this. We need to understand for what do we want to actually use knowledge management. If you look at ADB's knowledge management journey, we built on decades of knowledge management. You can see that we went through different phases, from a focus on more case-by-case project learning to more strategic approaches to knowledge management, heavy investments then in sharing of knowledge, especially documenting all kinds of explicit knowledge and sharing that, to now in an effort that is a lot more focused on collaboration, on providing knowledge when it's needed, to whom it's needed, and to connecting people, ideas, and solutions. You can read about this journey in our recently published book, and I'll share the link with you later. It's about ADB's knowledge management journey and knowledge solutions. So going through this journey in 2020, we realized that we have to take a different approach to knowledge management. And we now approved a new knowledge management action plan, which wanted to understand and kind of how to reinforce and enhance ADB's impact as a development bank and increase the impact of financing. So what we did, and I think that's the first recommendation also for the coalition or for any agencies involved in the coalition and in disaster resilient infrastructure, we shouldn't count knowledge products and services, but we should measure, and I think that's really where the holy grail is, the impact of the knowledge solutions we provide. We believe a lot of knowledge is with our people in the bank. So we take a user and a people-centric approach and are saying we need to connect the different experts in the bank. We need to also celebrate them as the heroes, which, who share knowledge, who create knowledge with our clients, and of course the heroes and the knowledge and experts in the government agency. So a lot is about fostering collaboration. And I think we've all realized during the COVID pandemic that even if we have so much knowledge available, and a lot of more knowledge has been published in the last 2 years, is actually about how it's used in collaboration and how it's used to solve very concrete problems. This brings us to the third point, and that is we are trying to improve the relevance and quality of our knowledge work. And for that, we really focus on our country teams and try to understand how we strengthen the capacity and the portfolios in our country teams. So for that, we are now actually providing knowledge programming in countries, which is very new for a bank, right? Where normally you would actually program your investment portfolios, your projects that you finance government, but now we're having really high-level policy dialogue to understand what is the problem, what development problem do we have, and how do we solve that, and how do we build long-term capacity in country. So this comes to the last part, and that is really about learning. How do we become this learning organization that constantly tries to improve what we are doing? So I think that is another important message for the coalition, and of course for any agency involved in the coalition. The second point is really about, we need to have a very clear point of view, why we do knowledge management and how we want to do this. And with our knowledge management action plan, we created a very participatory process, so everyone could contribute to that plan. Everyone was able to find their agenda, their reform in the plan, and we aligned our knowledge management action plan with the ISO knowledge management standard. That's the next recommendation we have for the coalition, but also for any agency involved. And what we find so fascinating with the ISO KM standard, that it really focuses on the business case for knowledge management. So the question is, how do we align knowledge management outcomes with the organizational outcomes? And obviously that is for you, for the coalition, for the partners to provide disaster resilient infrastructure. The next point is really the leadership aspect, and that is where at the highest level we need to include that knowledge is not just seen as a side playground, but as the main playground. And I'm not going now through all the aspects of the ISO standard. I invite you all to look at it, but this was really helped us to create common understanding and common ground of knowledge management to actually ensure that our senior management takes knowledge management seriously as an important asset which needs to be on the balance sheet of the bank. The third important part was we applied and we are applying change management tools and approaches to actually implement our knowledge management action plan. And we are leveraging several different other reform activities which are currently ongoing in the bank. Let me go quickly through this. The first one I've touched base on already is the why, the business value of knowledge management. What do we want to achieve? The second one is really the participatory approach. So there, for the coalition, it's probably important to agree on principles for knowledge management across the coalition partners, and of course also with the government agencies and partners. The third one was really about creating, kind of leveraging the different strategic ambiguity and creating this common ground and connect with various reforms. So the coalition, and you have different partners in government, different government agencies providing disaster resilient infrastructure. So that's what I mean with creating a common ground across these agencies, so everyone understands what knowledge is actually critical. The fourth one is really the leveraging different change processes, including digitalization. I understand the coalition is building a platform and a house, so to say, where knowledge can be shared, access, and where virtual communities can be created. And in our research, we found that this is really what is driving knowledge management at the moment. That is the setup of communities of common interests, because you have access to so much knowledge, but you need to really have access to the knowledge that is relevant for you. So that's where the community of practices and the subgroups actually come in. The fifth one is really understand stakeholders and what resistance could be. The sixth one is to offer easy to use knowledge management practices. And again, this comes back to the services the coalition will provide. And 7 and 8, I'm coming to that later, is about how this work is used to enhance branding and marketing. And probably for the coalition, this could have something to do with how much funding can be leveraged for disaster resilient infrastructure. I'll come to measurements later on and share this. The fourth one is really the distributed responsibility of knowledge management. We figured that just having a central center for knowledge management is not enough. We need to make sure that all teams, all departments across the bank have this shared responsibility. And we created a network of 88 knowledge focals. And again, using change management tools to create a tribe of knowledge management experts. So something similar could be actually done by the coalition to strengthen also knowledge management capabilities across the partners and across government agencies. fifth one, and I think this is very interesting and relevant, always, how do we measure we are actually making progress on knowledge management? So here we were able to include knowledge management in our corporate results framework of the bank. And we are measuring the impact of knowledge management in our client satisfaction, in our overall operational performance, which is linked to the quality and the completion rating of our projects, the alignment of our country portfolios with our strategy 2030. Obviously, in the case of the coalition, this would be alignment with how much disaster resilient infrastructure is actually being built. And we are looking at the organizational maturity using the APCQ, sorry, there's a typo, knowledge management capability assessment for benchmarking. You can see ADB is quite ambitious to benchmark against private sector and international other organizations. The sixth one is really about quick wins and building momentum. And there we need to showcase and demonstrate what's in for every partner, for every team member, for every staff in the bank. And what we have created is, number one, we are featuring now these knowledge solutions that staff actually provide together with our client counterparts. So there we are celebrating individuals, and this creates incentives, as you know, for professionals to share their knowledge. If you look at incentive research and knowledge management, you can see that monetary incentives are not very useful. It's actually the professional pride and the expectations that you have from your own work and the satisfaction you get from knowledge sharing activities. The second one is we are applying storytelling, which is a very powerful tool, something that I would also recommend to the coalition and the partner agencies to enhance how knowledge is being shared and actually to make it more interesting. So we have this knowledge innovation talk with very short videos featuring ADB staff where they share the knowledge solutions and the knowledge work they provide. So something similar could be actually set up by the coalition. And third, we have various platforms, including Development Asia, where we share our work on policy and our projects across the region. So it's really about engagement. The second one is we were able to position ADB on the global stage through the Knowledge Forum. And that's another recommendation is really, you know, how can you bring together interesting stakeholders, partners, and create dialogue and conversation. And what we found out is no one wants to have boring conversation. It needs to be controversial and provocative. And that could be another role for the coalition. The last one is we really wanted to show that we are not just talking, but we are walking the talk. So we actually work with several government agencies, for example, the National Economic Development Agency in the Philippines, to showcase how enhanced knowledge management can also enhance policy making. And this is just one example. We are also working with a few others. So with that, I'm finishing an overview of how we work and provide some lessons learned and recommendations. I do hope that you can join us on YouTube and LinkedIn and that we can continue our exchange on how to use knowledge management as a strategic asset. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Susan Roth, for that very interesting presentation, and you know the depth of experience that the Asian Development Bank has in this area, and your journey is really quite remarkable, and I'm sure CDRI can benefit from it. And your 6 elements, what is it for? Setting standards, using change management, distributing knowledge management, setting benchmarks and measuring progress, and going for quick wins, resonated really well. In the earlier part of your presentation, you talked about people, ideas, and solutions. That is really the key, and ultimately it is about the people. It's not just the formed knowledge products only. It's also a lot of tacit knowledge that sits with people. It's also about connecting people. And the slide that you showed in terms of distributing knowledge management across the organization, and nearly 100 people in the ADB working on this, that was quite remarkable and something to draw inspiration from. With that, let me now, and we'll come back to you, Dr. Susan Roth, both in the context of this presentation now and later, and see how we can benefit from your experience and expertise. With that, now let me turn to Mr. Zachary Bakwe from USAID and hear from him as to how knowledge can be engaged effectively to ensure a more sustainable, more resilient future. And USAID works across the world in a very large number of countries. USAID is on the ground, has a global footprint. What is it that we can learn from your experience? Over to you, Mr. Backway.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I was wondering, can I get my slides up or should I do it myself? Cool, excellent, thank you. So for USAID, we are, we've been taking our knowledge management journey through what we've called collaborating, learning, and adapting. And it's important to note that collaborating, learning, and adapting aren't necessarily new concepts for USAID. We've been doing these for quite a while. What we're stressing here when we're talking about collaborating, learning, and adapting is systematic, intentional, and resourced approach to collaborating, learning, and adapting, and dedicating the necessary time and resources to it. And while we're doing this is, next slide, please, we're looking for better development results and organizational effectiveness, improved quality and relevance of USAID programs by grounding them in evidence, making programs adaptive to new learning and changing contexts, extend USAID's influence through sharing knowledge and collaborating with partners, catalyzing learning to build capacity and facilitate country-led development. Because as we've all experienced, development is as much art as it is science, and you can't work from a blueprint necessarily, where it's expected that we know all the answers from the start, that we have one plan we start with that doesn't change because that's the plan. And we follow it to the letter because things don't change, but they do change. No changes in context, no unexpected divergences like elections or natural disasters, to impact infrastructure. And our assumptions are never wrong. But that's never the case. So you have to have your development hypothesis based on those assumptions, but we have to recognize that those assumptions aren't necessarily always going to be right or aren't necessarily always going to change. And so what we want to be able to do is check back, understand, is this panning out? And that's what collaborating, learning, and adapting is all about. It's about checking those assumptions and learning from what we see on the ground, and from monitoring our results and collecting and adapting accordingly. The overall goal is to enhance the work that we do. And so we see collaborating, learning, and adapting not as an add-on, it's an approach to carry out our daily work to increase the impact that we want to do. So next slide. In the simplest terms, CLA, collaborating, learning, and adapting, we call it CLA, asks us to consider questions that you see here. When you're collaborating, do you have the right people at the table? Who are you talking to? Who are you bringing into this conversation? Learning, are we asking the relevant questions? And we do a lot of this through learning agendas. And so we have an agency level learning agenda, and then we have learning agendas for, our various initiatives. So like there was a learning agenda for the Feed the Future initiative. And we use that as a way to kind of hone the questions that we're asking and, look to fill in those gaps. Adapting, are we collecting the information, the data, all that we're generating? Are we using it to, best effect and, to drive our decision-making purposes? Are we working in an organizational environment that supports collaborating? So the enabling environment, and sort of speaking to, what do we do in terms of the culture, the structures, the way we do things, our processes that really help to facilitate collaborating and learning and adapting throughout our organization. Again, it's not an add-on, it's the way we do work to enhance what we do for greatest impact. In some of the ways that we do this, what it looks like across USAID through our various missions and the like is, doing collaborative kind of mapping of, partners and stakeholders during our country strategy developments, understanding who are the most effective people to work with, who is doing some of this work. So we're not duplicating work. Doing strategic portfolio reviews, sort of stepping back, looking at the big picture. What does it all mean and how does it all fit together? And what can we do to improve what we're generating? Collaborating closely with host country governments and counterparts when we do the stock taking, when we do these knowledge capture efforts, to have those conversations and again, make sure that the collaboration is working and then the learning and adapting is happening as well. Next slide, please. And so, CLA is part of our overall process, what we call our program cycle. And so it fits within the program cycle, as you see here. It's embedded into the way we do work. So the ADS is the Automated Directive System, which is our kind of collection of policies and processes that USAID takes in order to do work. And so ADS 201 is where, we talk about the program cycle, but within that, we talk about where CLA fits and, making CLA plans for the various activities that we do. And so the program cycle is defined as USAID's operational model for planning, delivering, assessing, and adapting development programming in a given region or country to achieve more effective and sustainable results. And so CLA is part of that circle, that structure of the program cycle. And so what you see is kind of the various aspects and pieces that make up the program cycle. And as those pieces kind of fit together, we're driving towards the center, which is the results. And part of the translation of that work and how things fit together is through collaborating, learning, and adapting. So you can see it as part of a whole of those components of the program cycle that leads to results and impact. Next slide, please. And so, how CLA and the program cycle kind of mix together is the CLA principles. We're building upon and reinforcing, our existing processes and practices, the collaboration coordination in, a strategic fashion, value and use of all the forms of knowledge. So part of our knowledge is captured through our development experience Clearinghouse, which is our publicly accessible platform where we're capturing, our evaluations of different programs, the learning that is coming from our activities, and there for the public to use, and then for us to also refer back to. And that's also kind of part of the document, disseminate, and use knowledge and learning more broadly. Next slide, please. And so to help articulate some of this, because it's one thing to say, do it, be intentional, be strategic, but folks want something more concrete. And so what we've been doing is developing the CLA framework. And so this is the visualization of the framework. So this is, how to articulate and put a concrete picture around CLA. And it's meant to support staff in identifying and prioritizing CLA efforts by articulating the kind of diversity of what CLA can look like while giving it structure and clarity. And so you can see that it's broken up into 6 main component parts. And within those component parts, again, you have the program cycle pieces, the collaborating, learning, and adapting, and then that enabling environment, which I had spoken to earlier. And so just to recognize a lot of work has gone into it. USAID has been working on this, developing CLA since 2010. It's stock taking analysis of examples of CLA at missions with implementing partners to understand what it looks like in practice, grounding it in organizational learning and organizational development literature research on the concept of building a learning organization, and, countless iterations. And so this is currently like iteration 7, I think, of the framework. And so these things are, constantly being changed and adapted as, we're walking that talk. And so again, this framework is meant as a way to prioritize, what you're doing around collaborating, learning, and adapting, because, there's a recognition that you just can't do it all, but how can you apply certain pieces? Where do you see those gaps and how can you fill them accordingly? And so you can use this to help customize your work and how it's done to focus on your development priorities, focus on what the challenges that you're doing. because we want to show both what CLA means and what's needed to work this way, the framework, again, as I said, had two sides. There's the program cycle and there's the enabling conditions. And so CLA through strategy, project, and activity design, that's the program cycle. And then, the enabling environment is organizational culture, processes, resources that support a CLA-friendly environment. And as you can see, like I said, the 6 components, we're talking about the collaboration, the right people, as I'd mentioned earlier, are they at the table? Are we conversing? How is that networked? Learning, what is the technical evidence base for the work that we're doing? How do we systematize that work, our theories of change, our monitoring and evaluation? Adapting, are we taking that information that we're generating and are we using it in decision making? Under the culture, is CLA the norm? How are we speaking about it? How do we, talk about it in structures? Is leadership really kind of talking about it? What are our relationships? And then processes, where are we storing that knowledge? How are we better, sharing it through our structures? And resources, again, as it's been pointed out by earlier presenters, panelists, is that you're wanting to put sufficient resources towards this. Next slide. And just kind of as an example of the way we help staff to kind of apply this is the maturity tool. And so this is a way of taking kind of a more hands-on approach. And so we've had these created as a deck of cards. You can actually get them from the USAID Learning Lab website, usaidlearninglab.org. And then you can use it at various levels. I mean, you can use it at the team level, you can use it at a division, a bureau level, or even an agency level to a certain extent, and sort of a way of walking through those different components and their subcomponents on pieces where you think it would be worthwhile to help build greater, collaboration, learning, and adapting around your work. And so it's a really great resource. Again, something to think about as a way of helping to problem solve and help prioritize and focus learning, collaborating, learning, and adapting efforts. Next slide. And so this is just kind of an example of the cards and kind of looking at, everyone is not at the same place when you're working through this and sort of thinking about, okay, if it's not yet present, all the way to institutionalize, and what exactly does that mean? And what are some examples, and sort of helping you to think of what an action plan might look like moving forward. Next slide. And so again, I recommend checking out USAID Learning Lab. The CLA Toolkit is a great resource for looking at ways to apply CLA. And, we have each year, or fairly regularly, the CLA case competition, where again, we use a structure to kind of collect those stories from the field, implementing partners, our missions, our Washington, DC offices, on how CLA is being applied and what is the process that people are using. And again, to be able to share how people are applying CLA, and so others can have those ideas about, moving forward with it. And with that, I will hand it back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bakwe. I think it's a very interesting framework, the Collaborate, Learn, Adapt framework of USAID. I particularly liked your emphasis early on in your presentation, which emphasizes that in order for all of this to happen, it needs to be underpinned by systems, intentionality. It doesn't happen just like that. It has to be done intentionally, and resources. And the 6-part framework where you complemented Collaborate, Learn, Adapt with developing a culture, developing processes, and allocating resources for this. And finally, the emphasis that these things take time to mature, and it's not an all or nothing. We make progress towards what we want to achieve over a period of time, and we need to have sustained engagement in the area of knowledge management. With that, now let me turn to Mr. Louis Downing from Global Infrastructure Basel. He's a practitioner himself, so we would be Very keen to hear from him, practitioner's perspective. What are some very clear knowledge gaps in the resilient infrastructure space? We've discussed knowledge management at the at a broader level in the development practice as a whole, but let's come down to the specific issue of resilient infrastructure. What are the gaps he sees, and how his organization is trying to address some of those gaps. Over to you, Mr. Downing.
Thank you so much, Kamal, and thank you so much as well for inviting me to speak at this discussion. It's so important. It's such an important topic, and it's never been more important than now. I think that we can work together to see that the knowledge we have can really create a much greater amount of change than it would if we weren't sharing and collaborating. And I guess I'm talking about moving beyond creating business value to creating collaborative impact value for the entire infrastructure sector. So thank you so much. You guys do just fantastic work, and I'm really delighted to be here. The reason I'm here, I'm the CEO of the Global Infrastructure Basel Foundation, and we've assessed about 280 infrastructure projects to see how resilient and sustainable they are. So what my role in this discussion is, I guess, is to ground the discussion in some really concrete examples of where are the knowledge gaps that we've seen in the sector, and then what are we trying to do about that, or what do we as a community need to do about that? So very broadly speaking, I'd say that there's a gap in terms of best practice for improving project resilience. There's a big gap regarding data. So on the forward-looking shocks and stresses, particularly those related to climate change, but not exclusively climate change. And then knowledge of how to move finance towards resilient infrastructure. So I think in our experience, these would be the three key areas. And just as a note, and I think this echoes what you were saying earlier, Kamal, is that to move knowledge to action is really the most important thing here. And to do that requires capacity, regulation, and incentives as well. So I think a lot of the work that we do also looks at those three elements. So I'm going to look at a few concrete examples, anonymized examples. So I'll tell you features that we've noticed on real infrastructure projects without naming which projects they were. So airport planning, we have assessed various airports around the world, and you would be astonished at the lack of guidance that regulation provides to project developers developing airports with regard to how future climate change impacts will drastically change the functionality of those airports. And one example of that is that in a lot of locations, climate change will result in major shifts to wind direction, and that has a huge impact on the viability of different airport runway alignments, as well as the viability of different diversion airports. So really, really important gap right there. I have three examples, and I'm being as concrete as I possibly can. The second example, railways. So we've assessed a vast number of railways around the world, and what we've seen is that in most jurisdictions, the regulatory requirements require projects to look at the past 100 years of data or so, in terms of how much flooding what kind of temperature extremes should the equipment be designed for. And that can lead to situations like the two images here, where you can see this rail line on the left hasn't been designed for the kind of heat tolerances that have been required. And on the right then is just a classic flooding. These images are not of specific projects that I'm talking about. They're just examples. As I said, I'm anonymizing them. And just again, to make it very concrete, up in the right-hand corner there, this is an example of an expansion joint. So this is the kind of very basic considerations that need to be built into tender requirements to see that these pieces of infrastructure are protected from the next 100 years of climate conditions, not the past 100 years. Final example, then, just looking at something totally different, supply chain disruption. So we've assessed, this is an example of a cocoa manufacturing plant that we assessed. And in one of the criteria that we look at is to say, what will be the impacts of climate change upon your supply chain? And the image on the right, you can see green corresponds to lower temperatures and red to higher temperatures. And this is with a 1.5 degree change. And what we found is that the majority of the farms that this new project was relying upon to feed them with cocoa would, within the next 30 years, no longer be viable for cocoa production. So another example of a knowledge gap there. So I'll briefly talk about some of the things that the GIB Foundation are doing to address such knowledge gaps, and then maybe round it up with some key messages. So these are four projects that we're working on, or four endeavors. The first one is the SURE, the Standard for Sustainable and Resilient Infrastructure. The next is a Sustainable Infrastructure Intelligence Tool. The third is professional training and qualifications. And then the final one is the Nature for Catchments launch ramp. Just very briefly to step through those four examples. The SURE standard is a global voluntary standard that we have used basically as a repository of best practice knowledge for how to design, build, operate, and maintain sustainable and resilient infrastructure. So this comes from a whole network of organizations, and this is what we use to assess projects. It's also what we use to train people. Next one, this is in progress, Sustainable Infrastructure Intelligence Tool, where in addition to the SURE certification, we're building an artificial intelligence tool which will take publicly available information about infrastructure projects to define how sustainable they are likely to be based on the information that we have. So these are things like publicly available documentation that we know where to find, and also geospatial overlays. So we're bringing multiple sources of knowledge together to basically say this project's got a problem or this project's looking great. Then we're notifying project developers of that assessment, and then working with them to upgrade that piece of infrastructure, and then finally assessing it to say, yes, as a third party, this infrastructure is looking sustainable. And then these projects will enter a global marketplace where our intention is that financiers can then identify infrastructure projects that align with their appetite for risk and align with their strategic objectives, which increasingly these days are to become more sustainable, more resilient. And then up in this box in the right-hand corner, in addition to this assessment, we're also looking at is there a possibility to then monetize some of the impacts coming out of the infrastructure. Next example, professional training and qualification. So we're currently running a massive open online course, which is based on the SURE standard, and is run through the Swiss Federal University, the EPFL. And when we're currently in we're just about to launch then the next version of that, which will actually be will give professionals who've completed the training successfully the ability to conduct shore appraisals of infrastructure projects. So that will become an important professional qualification for those individuals. And then the fourth example is the Nature for Catchments launch ramp. So we see that natural infrastructure is one of our best defenses against increasing flood risk. So we've partnered with a bunch of organizations here to bring together knowledge that we've gathered mainly across the European Union and some projects that we've run there to collect case studies and lessons learned, to maintain that knowledge, and then to create out of that a launch ramp which will originate projects for flood reduction using nature-based infrastructure. So those were the examples. I would very much invite anyone to reach out to me to discuss any more of that in detail. And maybe I'll just close by saying I think this is such an important topic because if we can bridge the knowledge gaps that we have, not just within our own organizations, but between them, we could really create a huge revolution regarding resilient infrastructure. And a specific objective that I think would be excellent for us as a community to aim towards would be to use our collective intelligence and data to demonstrate that resilient infrastructure financially outperforms conventional infrastructure. And that's not a big claim. We know it to be true on a case-by-case basis. But if we can build the right data, that we can really stand behind that statement, that we can support the resilient infrastructure asset class, then that's how we could really, turn knowledge into action in the form of mobilizing private capital that currently is not interested. So I might leave it there. Thank you very much, Kamal.
Thank you very much, Louis. Indeed, if we are able to mobilize our collective knowledge to make a case to investors that resilient infrastructure makes financial sense, then we will be not just creating business value, but what you earlier called the impact value from our knowledge work. Very interesting examples, very vivid examples of where the knowledge gaps are. You talked about airports, railways, supply chains, and very interesting knowledge offerings from Global Infrastructure Basel as well. I think we have a program cut out for all of us to work together and collaborate and work together in some of these areas. With that, now let me turn to Dr. Mona Anand. She's the Director of Knowledge and Research at the CDRI. CDRI aims to foster a knowledge ecosystem to support a resilient infrastructure as well. There are some gaps we are collectively identifying, and we would work towards addressing those. So let's hear the CDRI perspective from Dr. Mona Anand.
Thank you very much. Greetings to everyone in this virtual room. Like Kamalji just said, I work for the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And I would draw your attention to our identity as a coalition that is passionate about disaster resilience of infrastructure, both the new infrastructure that is proposed in the future, as well as existing. So just, I want to underscore one very, very important fact here, that we're not obsessed about our own logo, but we are obsessed about the potential of working together with our members and partners as a coalition to take forward the agenda of disaster resilient infrastructure. To give you a bit more detail about the CDRI perspective, the problem that we are trying to address here is like I said, disaster resilience of infrastructure. And in planning terms, such problems are classified as, what they call wicked problems, which require multidimensional, multidisciplinary, and systemic focus, because the moment you try to address one end of the problem, a new problem raises its ugly head. I can illustrate that with an example for you. If you, the Kochi airport in south of India, 2018 floods. This is the first totally solar powered airport in the world. And during the flooding, 20% of the solar panels were damaged, right? Besides that, the airport itself was closed for 2 weeks. So we are trying to solve one problem, but there are other problems that we have to encounter. Again, if we are moving towards a net zero target, a net zero future, all of us have committed to that, or at least subscribed to that intention during the COP26. We know that at this moment, it's basically commercial and industrial units that are driving the process of net zero through solar power installations. Can we afford to miss out on individual rooftop owners? Perhaps not. Where is the gap? Financing is one of the bottlenecks because there is no resale value for these kind of technologies. So there are multiple dimensions to a problem that we are trying to solve, and there is no way that we can solve it just by a unidirectional approach. Therefore, there is a need for an iterative cycle of knowledge dissemination, bringing it into practice, learning from practice, and feeding back into the knowledge creation process, just as Zachary was also trying to highlight. So that is one very, very definite point in our programming when we look at knowledge management. And therefore, knowledge to us, knowledge management really is a catalyst for driving the process of change in the space of DRI that we desire to achieve. How do we do this? Now, there are a couple of offerings that we have at the coalition for our members and partners. The first one is a Dri dialogue process, just like this one that we are all participating in right now. And this to us is a very powerful conversational space to bring together experiences and see what we can do with those experiences and conversations together. I'll give an example. At the coalition, we did a study for the resilience, to look at the resilience of power sector in the Indian state of Odisha. And based on that experience, we quickly put together an advisory on what can be done here and now to improve or enhance the resilience of infrastructure, power infrastructure in the state. And this advisory was actually used across the coastal states of India during the cyclone season. Now, we can't say that it was all because of our effort. I'm sure there was a lot of other initiatives that fed into the quality of response that we saw. But then, we try to bring all of these conversations together in an impactful and an action-oriented perspective. The other offering that we have is what we call the Dri Connect. It's a platform that has a few components, and I'll share them in a moment. The Dri Connect is really our space to bring in all the stakeholders together on a platform to discuss what can be done about the resilience problematic as such. So the first component within the Connect platform is a knowledge portal. It is work in progress, and our aspiration is to make it the single window repository, digital repository of all knowledge that's possible in the DRI space for everyone to access freely. That's our intention there. The other is a DRI marketplace. This is the space where solution providers and seekers of solutions can come together and find a place to negotiate and work out the way forward between themselves. And the third is a community of practice that we are very, very passionate and excited about. This is the space where really, experiences will feed into the future solutions that can be taken forward in different contexts. Building on that, we are also in the process of putting together peer learning experiences. And there was an earlier mention about tacit knowledge. This is where we want to bring out, with the community of practice, we want to bring out the tacit knowledge that is residing in people's life stories as professionals to bear upon what can be done together in the DRI space. Besides that, there are studies, white papers, opportunities for putting together explicit knowledge. So that is also an offering. Within all of this effort, our focus is basically twofold. One is to retain a futuristic vision all the time. We want to stay ahead of the curve with regard to the context around us that is changing very, very fast. And the other is a focus on solution-centeredness, basically to avoid duplication with other agencies, with other actors, and also to avoid common mistakes that people make. We do not have to keep reinventing the wheel each time we want to do something. So this is basically, our perspective on how we approach our work. Within all of this, there is plenty of space, not only for CDRI's work, but also for the work of others. So this whole question of contribution and attribution to change, that we feel should be taken care of when there are transparent mechanisms for knowledge sharing that are available. Although there's still a very long way for us to go the ISO route, like Dr. Roth was sharing. So this is broadly what we are doing. I have one last point, which is with regard to why knowledge management is so important for us. Reasons are several. I'll just flag two for your consideration. The first one is around governance for disaster resilient infrastructure. Now, we all know that governance, good governance, really, it relies on knowledge flows. Therefore, updated standards and codes and performance benchmarks, just as Louis was sharing, that is where, that is the space for taking forward all of this. Disaster, financing for resilience, that is the other dimension within our governance piece. That's that. And basically, the other point is that, we've realized through our work that disaster resilience of infrastructure is emerging more as a global problem. And that's where we see a lot of interdependencies between countries, between states and subnational entities. I'll give you an example. We found out through one of our studies that data centers within the telecom infrastructure system are a very, very critical node for resilience. And there is a study, I think it's a World Bank study, that highlights that in the last 5 to 6 years, about 9,000 USD per minute is lost to businesses in case of an outage. Now, a data center is such a critical node. Interoperability is so important for it to be resilient and to lend resilience to the entire system as such. And we've heard from our partners that there are open APIs that are available, but there is no neutral platform for them to make that offering to other people so that redundancy and backup can be facilitated through this process. So this is really what we are trying to offer to our members and partners, a neutral platform that fosters knowledge collaborations and knowledge flows within the community of practitioners and policymakers to take forward the resilience agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mona Anand, for that CDRI perspective, the various tools that CDRI is deploying towards supporting knowledge management through dialogue series, Dri Connect, the establishment of a community of practice, peer learning marketplace. This is really a very good opportunity to connect with colleagues and friends from other organizations who have been at it for quite some time and bring together their learning with specific focus on resilient infrastructure. I think as a next step, what I would like to do now is open the floor to panelists to come back again and reflect a little bit. We talked about how knowledge can be deployed for creating business value, improving organizational effectiveness, having greater, more optimal development impact. But what do you see as some of the key challenges in really making sure this is something which came through all the four speakers in really making sure that we can demonstrate the value of knowledge management in terms of the results we deliver on the ground, not just making ourselves effective and efficient internally, but also actually showing that it changes things on the ground, it improves people's lives, it builds resilience in our societal systems. So any reflections from any of the panelists are warmly welcomed. Mr. Beckway, please go ahead.
I'll jump in. So I always find it challenging the desire to demonstrate the value of knowledge management, because I think if you're kind of on that footing, it's almost like some of the battle has already been lost, because to have to convey to folks that knowledge exchange, knowledge as an asset has value in today's kind of work environment where we're all kind of knowledge workers and creating knowledge products. It seems to me that that's a difficult one to do. I think a lot of businesses where knowledge management works well, it is already the assumption that knowledge is the asset. A lot of knowledge management work had been a lot of it honed within, let's say, the oil industry and the like, and a lot of it was like, there is value in this knowledge. We need to manage it or manage our processes to improve upon it. And so I almost feel like it's the ideal to start where, okay, it is of value. Okay, how do we go about doing it? And sort of learning about the practices, learning about the way, is it communities of practice? Is it, kind of building an infrastructure to capture knowledge? What exactly are those kind of pieces, as opposed to, always having to demonstrate the value? Not to say that that's not the case, but I think it's often very difficult because it is such a complex thing. I think, things like what Suzanne was talking about for ADB in terms of capturing stories, anecdotes in a sort of structured way. And so you then have a library of anecdotes all sort of talking about the impact and the value. I think, NASA, the US government space agency, does something similar with their knowledge management, where they're kind of capturing those stories in a regular fashion and are able to say, okay, here's the breadth of stories and this is the value. But they're so context specific often that it's almost hard to sort of say, here's a quantitative number that goes along with it. So I think it's often very challenging to make that case in that particular way. You have to sort of say, I think as Mona was saying, it is how many sticky problems or sticky issues have you addressed with knowledge management and been able to actually bring resolution, find those pain points, and change that. I think is the big thing. Over.
Thank you very much, Zach. I think you made a rather poignant point that if we have to now in the 21st year of the 21st century, if we have to make a point that knowledge management indeed changes things for the better, then perhaps we haven't made our case strong enough in the last 20 years. So there isn't necessarily always a one-to-one linkage, but the benefits are obvious. And if we did a better job of storytelling, we might be able to better communicate the impact of better knowledge management. Any other points from the panel on this? Susan, Louis?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think 2 points. One, you mentioned already, Zach, and that's the anecdotal evidence and sharing among practitioners, but that of course creates this community, this requires this community of practitioners across government agencies who are willing and committed to share that and share their problems. I think to understand if it really leads to change is basically, and the problem there with infrastructure is it often takes some time to build it, right? So we will see that probably only in a couple of years. So maybe that's why it's so important to start to document these case studies and examples now. And as Louis has also shared, there are a lot of examples, and as disasters are increasing, obviously, those will increase too. So maybe now it's really about having a good taxonomy to understand which problems are we solving and in which context. And in which countries, and then building this catalog, and at the same time connecting people and creating a platform where people can voice the problems that need to be solved or whatever kind of problems they're thinking about. So taxonomy, the repository, and connecting people.
Thank you. Taxonomy, connecting people. Luis, you go ahead, and then Mona.
Yeah, I mean, just I would thoroughly echo both what Susan and Zachary said, and maybe just to put another view on the table. I think one of the biggest challenges we have at the moment is differentiating between knowledge and noise in an era where we've never been more connected. And there's no shortage of information out there, of data, but understanding what is important and how to use that important information to further our objectives. I think that is a very important question. And maybe finally, on a positive note, I think we've never been better placed to address this issue as we are now. We have so many incredible technological advances from AI, geospatial data, machine learning, and natural language processing to enable us to take this huge wealth of information and data on the internet and turn that into knowledge and turn that knowledge into action. It's a really exciting time. Thanks, Kamal.
Thank you, Louis. That is a very important point. How do we differentiate knowledge from noise, and at the same time deploy the tools that are available to us that were not available 20 years ago to actually generate knowledge from vast amounts of information, data analysis that is out there. Mona, do you want to have the last word?
It's not necessarily the last word, just a small thought there. I kind of echo what the other three speakers said, and particularly, Louis, what you were saying. Similar point, but a slightly different take. Yes, there is noise, but what is the quality of information that's available to us? And I have constantly observed that there is this tyranny of the urgent, with people who are driving the change on the ground, people who are really the keepers of tacit knowledge. How do we make time for them to come and share that knowledge so that it can be sort of, brought into a shareable form? That perhaps will also be a challenge as we move forward. Over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will, before we close, I will not try to summarize everything that was said by the panelists, very rich discussions, but I think there were three big ticket takeaways for me. But before I give you those three takeaways, I would like to quote Zach in response to the last round of questions, where he said that knowledge management, when it is successful, it is almost invisible. I think that is so true. It is done so well that you don't even realize that it is making a difference. With that preface, three big takeaways for me are: number one, which ran through almost all the four panelists, is that we need to distribute knowledge management functions across the board. It can't be sitting in one corner. And that means that, it has to be integrated in the project cycles. We have to have the right processes, culture, and it needs to be better resource. It can't sit in the corner just by itself. It really needs to be integrated across the board. The second takeaway is that there is the opportunity to deploy diverse tools for managing and sharing knowledge. The example that Susan gave about storytelling, the kind of specific products that Louis talked about. So I think we can exercise our imagination in using all of these traditional and not so traditional tools for knowledge management. And finally, I think if we are continually challenged by the question of impact, then perhaps the best way to address is to continue to identify some of the common challenges and gaps, particularly in the area of disaster resilient infrastructure. Some of those were highlighted by Louis, but there would be more. And that really can galvanize everyone's imagination that this is really a common challenge. It can't be solved without collaboration, without bringing to bear the best knowledge that exists across the world on those common problems. With that, I think we are getting to the close of this session, but before we close, there are two questions of audience poll. But before the poll questions are posted, I would very much like to thank the panelists for coming to this event and participating and engaging in this conversation. This is just the beginning, and we will continue to stay engaged. So here are the questions. Are you interested in joining the CDRI-led knowledge network on disaster resilient infrastructure? Yes, 100%. What would be your preferred touch point for the network? Single choice. Email groups, listserv, in-person events, similar webinars, online consultations. I would have thought that after the pandemic, people would be really craving for in-person events. But so similar webinars seems to be winning, followed by email group listservs. Okay, thank you very much. And with that, we close this webinar here. Thank you very much. I look forward to staying engaged and working with all of you in our common endeavor to manage knowledge for action. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.